Hey guys, it's Jill and welcome back to my booktube channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my June reading wrap-up as well as my July TBR. This month, I was able to finish a bunch of books, which made me really happy. I also DNF'd 2 books, and then I listened to 1 book on an audio on Spotify. But the first book that I read in June was Ties That Tether, and I did read the physical book of this, but I don't have it with me right now, so I'll just put up a picture. One of the big plot points of this book is a major spoiler, so I'm not going to mention that. But this is about our FMC Azair, and she ends up in this particular situation with Raphael, the MMC, and they kind of have to figure things out, but they're also unknowingly co-workers, which just made this situation even more complicated. And Azair is also dealing with a lot of family pressure from her mom to be a certain way and to uphold certain traditions that her mom has really expected Azair to fulfill. So in this book, I did feel like the relationship between Azair and Raphael was moving a little bit quickly than I would have liked. I felt like the family aspect and reading about the dynamics between Azair and her mother were very interesting and very sad to read about, honestly. A major theme of this book was identity and how your identity can change depending on the significant other that you choose. And overall, I rated this one 3.5 stars. I really did enjoy this and would recommend, but I did feel like the relationship between the 2 characters, like I kind of already mentioned, I just think it was a little bit underdeveloped, and I wished it was maybe more fleshed out than it was. And then the ending I felt like was also a little bit rushed, but I still think it's a good book. The next book that I read this month was A Funny Story, and I was really anticipating this one because I adored Happy Place that was released last summer. So in this, our FMC Daphne, she is in a very difficult situation because her fiance broke up with her to be with his girl best friend, and this girl best friend also has a significant other, so they run off together. So then Daphne and her ex-fiance's new girl's ex-boyfriend end up living together, which is super messy, and I was really looking forward to seeing how everything played out. I really love Emily Henry's writing. I just find it so entertaining, and the characters are so witty. The banter between them is really fun to read. So since Daphne is now with the new girl's ex-boyfriend, it's kind of interesting, and they end up doing a little fake dating kind of scheme. And similar to Happy Place, I did feel like this book also really focused on friendships, and specifically with this book, it was about forming new friendships when you're kind of in a difficult situation, since after Daphne and her ex broke things off, she kind of also wasn't really close to the people that he introduced her to anymore. So she was kind of left having to form new friendships on her own, which she wasn't really comfortable with, but she ended up having a lot of growth in that area, I found, and I really enjoyed reading about that. There were a few decisions that Daphne made that I didn't really think were logical and were honestly just very kind of frustrating to read about, I felt like. And then also the third act breakup, it was definitely the miscommunication trope, which again is a little bit frustrating to read. So overall, I gave this one, oh my gosh, my cat. Overall, I gave this one 3.5 stars. This book fell a little bit flat for me, and by the end of it, I wasn't really convinced on the relationship between Daphne and Maëlys. I'll still recommend this book though, and I'm eager to see what Emily Henry comes out with next. There are a few books on her backlist that I haven't read yet, which I have to. Book Lovers is one of them. I can't think of any other ones, so maybe I'll pick that one up sometime soon. But the third book that I read this month was To Kill a Kingdom. I was really excited about this one because I got this book last summer, I believe, because I think it was recommended on Instagram or BookTube or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but this was a Little Mermaid retelling, which I thought would be so interesting to read about. And in this one, the FMC Lyra, she is a siren, so a special kind of mermaid, and she turns into a human because her mom, who is the sea, I always say witch, but it's not witch, the sea queen, she turns Lyra into a human for something bad that she did. And then she also has to gain the trust of this Prince Elian, who is the MMC. And unfortunately with this book, I wasn't super captivated with it right from the start. I don't know if it was something about the writing, and this book also wasn't very long. I feel like it was 200 something pages. And there was one thing about her turning into a human that I thought was going to be much of a bigger deal than it ended up being. Like, it was barely even talked about. Also, in terms of the romance, I just didn't really feel like there was much of a connection there. So by the end, when they were together, I was like not really caring. And the inevitable reveal that happens at the end was just so random and didn't really make sense to me. So overall, I did give this one 2.5 stars. After that though, I read Glow of the Everflame, which is the second book of the Kindred's Curse saga, and actually today, because it's July 1st, the 4th book of that series came out, so I might read the 3rd and 4th book coming in July, but I haven't put it on my TBR, so I might not also. In this series, it is 100% super slow burn romance, so if you're going into this wanting like a romance that is like, I don't like quick romances either when it's like super insta-lovey and stuff, but in this series, the slow burn has been so slow that it's like just kind of excruciating at this point to kind of read about. There is a love triangle in this one, and since we get the POV of the main character, it is pretty obvious, I felt like, who she wanted to end up with. In terms of the plot though, I did feel like the main character, what's her name? Her name is DM. I felt like she just kept digging herself deeper and deeper into the main issue, and then she just was very indecisive about where her loyalties lie. I did, however, enjoy the ending, and there were many things that I didn't expect or anticipate that ended up happening, like a few twists and turns. So overall, I gave this one 3 stars, and I gave the first one, A Spark of the Everflame, 3 stars as well. So by the end of the second one, I wasn't exactly sure if I wanted to continue with the 3rd and 4th books, but I feel like since it's been a few weeks after I've finished that one, I think I might continue with the next ones because I am interested to see what happens in the next ones and how the rest ends up getting wrapped up at the end. And after Glow of the Everflame, I read Not in Love, which I was super excited for this new release by Ali Hazelwood. And it was kind of a different concept, which she says at the start with an author's note that it was going to be different than the previous STEM romances that she's written in the past. The FMC in this one, her name was Rue, and she was more reserved and less kind of outgoing, that like bubbly personality that Ali has written in the past, which I personally felt like made her more relatable. And she was also an engineer and was super smart, who worked as a biotech engineer, and I really liked reading about that. The issue in this book was that the MMC Eli, he was a partner for this company that like acquires other companies, and the company that they're trying to acquire is the company that Rue is working at, which she does not want this merge to happen, and she's very upset about it because the owner of the company that she works for, she's really close friends with, and she really trusts her and doesn't want her business to be acquired. This was definitely not the typical lighthearted, fluffy read that Ali Hazelwood is known for, and with the plot, I did find it was a little bit predictable on who the bad guy was, and it was supposed to be this forbidden romance kind of trope, which I didn't feel like was necessarily executed very well, and I didn't think it ended up being like a big deal at all, the fact that the romance was forbidden. Also with this book, it has the friends with benefits trope, which I feel like I'm not a huge fan of reading that trope. I definitely prefer when the characters have a deep emotional connection. So overall, I think I rated this one 3 stars. I was debating between 3 and 3.5, but then I think I settled with 3 stars. And I did read this one really fast though, and one thing that was weird about this one, I will point out that her perspective was in first person. It was dual POV, but then in his perspective, it was 3rd person, which was kind of odd, I felt like. I'm not sure whether or not I would have preferred that his perspective was also in first person or not, but it was something that I noticed, and I felt like it was a little bit strange. But after that, I read The Housemaid is Watching. So this is the 3rd book of the Housemaid series by Frida McFadden. And in this one, the main female character, Millie, her and her husband and her kids move into this very nice neighborhood, and they're so happy because they finally bought a house and they're able to start to live this dream that they've been working so hard towards. The neighbors though, they're a little bit sketchy, and one in particular seems very interested in Millie's husband, which she obviously is not happy about. In this one, I was a bit disappointed in Millie and her husband. I felt like her husband in the previous books was really on top of things, very smart, but then in this one, he was kind of just like out of it, and some of the things he would say to Millie were just kind of like annoying. And then Millie, she was starting to act a little bit like the wife from the first housemaid book, who was really not nice to Millie when Millie was working for her as a housemaid. And it was just kind of interesting how the tables turned that way. The whole time with this book, I definitely didn't expect the reveal of who ended up being like the bad guy or whatever. And normally I'm not able to predict with Frida McFadden books who the bad guy is because it's just like so random, which sometimes I like, but other times I'm kind of like, okay, but even if I tried to like clue things together, I feel like I wouldn't get it. So sometimes it's like too out of left field. One thing I do like about Frida McFadden books though is that they really aren't that scary, which I get scared really easily. So I do appreciate that. And overall, I gave this one 3 stars. Even though I read her books really fast and I feel like they're good kind of ways to get out of reading slumps, I just don't feel like I can rate them really high, like 4 or 5 stars. And I've said this in previous videos, but just something about her writing just doesn't really do it for me to get those higher ratings. So yeah, that was The Housemaid is Watching. And oh, also I did feel like this book kind of didn't really fit in the whole Housemaid series in general, other than the fact that the main character Millie was a part of it. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that though. And then I listened to my first audiobook since I don't even know how many years it's been. I feel like the last audiobook that I can remember listening to was literally in grade 8 that we had to listen all together as a class to this one audiobook. But I listened to This Summer Will Be Different, which was Carly Fortune's new release from the spring. And this one was so interesting. I don't know if it was just the listening experience and the narrator was a little bit much, but I just felt like the descriptions of the FMC describing the MMC were like kind of creepy almost. So the FMC, her name is Lucy, and she goes and visits her best friend's family in PEI, and she ends up having a one-night stand. I took a little break because my battery died, but I was talking about This Summer Will Be Different. So she hooked up with her best friend's brother, who at the time she didn't know was her best friend's brother, like it was a stranger to her. But then afterwards she figures out it's her best friend's brother and is like freaking out and decides that she can never tell her best friend, which I honestly thought was like not really making sense because I didn't really think it was that big of a deal. This was also pretty insta-lovey in terms of the romance because after that night with him, she was like obsessed with him and was always thinking about him every summer afterwards. And I think it was like 4 summers that she was like thinking about it, but they didn't even really talk for any of that time. So to me, it didn't really make sense that she was still like into him that way, especially because she lived in Toronto and he lived in PEI. So they had long distance too. So they literally just like didn't really see each other for many years. So this FMC, I can't remember if I said her name, but her name is Lucy and she is a flower shop owner. And in the book, she's doing her best friend's wedding florals, which the wedding is 2 weeks away. But then 1 week before the wedding, her friend decides to jet off to PEI because she's like freaking out about something, which we don't know the reasoning until at the end of why the friend did this. But when Lucy found out that her friend left, she gets in contact with her friend, and then her friend requests that she also flies out to PEI to be there to help her, which was pretty tight timing considering her wedding is so soon and Lucy has so much to do because she's doing the flowers for the whole thing. But she decides to go to PEI anyways, and then of course she sees the brother again and she's like goo goo gaga over him still, which I kind of felt like their dialogue was pretty cringy honestly. And the main character, she was just so whiny. It was a little bit treacherous to listen to. These characters were also almost 30 and I felt like their communication was just very poor. The communication with her friend was bad and the communication with the boy, I think his name was Felix, it was just not doing it for me. And I felt like Lucy just had no idea what she really wanted. She would make these grandiose plans with Felix and then later she would be like, wait, like I don't think I actually want this, which was really confusing as a listener. I think this might be the last book that I read by Carly Fortune, unfortunately, because I feel like she is really into writing the trope of like where the characters meet for one day and then they're like obsessed with each other and can only think about each other for many years, which doesn't really make sense to me. And I feel like it's just not very logical, so I don't love reading those kind of tropes. So I did give This Summer Will Be Different 2 stars. After that, I read Queen of Shadows. This is the 3rd or 4th book? 5? Oh, I guess it's the 5th book of the Throne of Glass series, and I can't say too much about this because it's like the middle of the series, so I can't spoil things. But just briefly, our main female character, Selena, she is trying to save her cousin. There were also witches, which in the previous book there were a bunch of different storylines that eventually came together in this book, which was interesting to see all the different characters finally merge together and be in the same scenes and stuff. This book is over 600 pages, I think. Yeah, 645-ish. And I literally felt like when I was reading it, it went by really quickly and there wasn't really a dull moment. It was really interesting from the start. There's demons, there's characters from previous books that show up again in this book, and there's the whole king and that situation going on. But I gave this book 4 stars and I'm super excited for the next books to come. There are 3 more, and the next 2 are the tandem read, which I do plan on doing, but I probably won't get to this month in July, unfortunately. But I do want to get to that. Maybe in August I'll read the tandem read. And after Queen of Shadows, I read Autobiography, and in this, the MMC, his name is Tanner. He lives in a very religious area in Utah, and he's in this special writing class where you have to write a story, and the kind of TA mentor for this class is one of the winners, or not winners, but like he was also in this class previously, and then his story ended up getting published, so he's kind of well known. And so since he's the mentor of this class, he spends time with Tanner, and Tanner definitely falls for him really fast. I felt like this was really sweet, but there were some things that Tanner told Sebastian, which is the TA guy. I don't think I said his name before, but he told Sebastian some things very, very early on which didn't really make sense to me. But I don't know, maybe he just got the feeling that like he was super comfortable and able to say these things. But this was something that even his very close best friend didn't know about him. So I felt like it was weird that he told Sebastian before telling his best friend. Also, the relationship moved very fast in this. I think it was around 80 pages. The couple was already together. So I felt like I would have preferred if it was drawn out just a little bit more to maybe add some tension. One of the main topics in this was religion, and Tanner's family was actually not religious, which was kind of a little bit of a difficulty for his family considering they're in a community that is very, very religious. But I liked how he was able to be super open with his mom and dad about this whole situation, especially since Sebastian, the guy that he wants to be with, was also part of a very religious family, so it was kind of opposites. Overall, I liked this novel. I felt like it had a good perspective on identity and kind of just coming of age in general. There were some conversations that Tanner and Sebastian had that were pretty difficult to read about just because of the situation. It was really sad for Tanner to like hear the things Sebastian had to say. But overall, I gave this one 3 stars and I would recommend this one. And after that, I read A Fate Inked in Blood. This is a fantasy romance. This was new this year. I can't remember when it came out, maybe around February. But in this, the FMC, her name is Freya, and she has magical powers, but she's been told from a very early age by her father that she can't tell people about this because if she did, then people would use her for her magic. So unfortunately, at the start of this, it is revealed that she does have magic. So then the king is trying to get in an arranged marriage with her, which he wants to do this because he anticipates there's going to be a war between their kingdom and an enemy kingdom. It was called Nordaland, I think. And her specific power is that she's a shield maiden, so she can protect from enemy like attacks, I guess. And the MMC though, it is kind of weird because the way they meet is a very strange circumstance, and I honestly wasn't a huge fan of how they connected. There is the forced proximity and kind of bodyguard trope in this, which I guess she needed protection to go to this specific place for a ritual. Honestly, the whole plot was a little bit convoluted. I wasn't exactly sure what was like really going on, and I just didn't really see the romance between Freya and the MMC. I can't even remember his name, but there just didn't really seem to be any chemistry between them, and they didn't really talk that much, I felt like. So I didn't really care when they ended up together at the end. At the end though, there was a really big cliffhanger, but at that point I just wasn't really invested in the plot or the characters at all. So I think I might pass. Well, I'll likely pass on when the next book of this series comes out. I don't know how many books there are supposed to be in this, but it is the Saga of the Unfated, and this is book 1. So the second one, I don't even know when it's supposed to come out, but I did unfortunately give this one 2 stars. And then after I read a book on my Kindle that I started a while ago, but it was Love Redesigned, and I actually ended up DNFing this one because I just felt like the main guy character was like weirdly possessive over the main girl, and it just didn't really make sense to me because they haven't talked for many years. So it gave me the ick when he was acting this way, when I felt like he had no grounds to do that. But this is a second chance romance and a childhood best friends to lovers trope romance book. And in this, the FMC, she is a interior designer, I think, and then the MMC, he was like a contractor type situation. And the plot was that they are working together on this house, and then yeah, I mean, I don't know what ended up happening because I didn't finish it, but that is what they were doing. They were supposed to work on this house together, and I don't know if they're supposed to like rent it out or what they were doing, but I just DNF'd at around, what was it, I think it was like 20-ish%, like 23% maybe, just because I was, yeah, not a huge fan of the MMC and how he was just weirdly possessive for no reason in my opinion. And I know that the second in this interconnected standalone series came out, which it is called Love Unwritten, and I don't know whether or not I'm going to pick it up. This was also my first Lauren Asher book, so I think I should pick up Love Unwritten just to see if I can enjoy that one, because I do want to give this author another try. And I've heard so many good things about Love Redesigned before reading it, so maybe it was just a me thing. But after I finished that, I was feeling super slumpy and unmotivated to really read anything. So I'm kind of nervous, I guess, to go into Love Unwritten and have the same feelings. But maybe like in a few months I'll get back to that one and see how that one goes. After that though, I picked up Before I Let Go, and I was really looking forward to this one because it has amazing reviews on Goodreads. So many 5 stars. I think it's like a 4.3 or something on Goodreads, like the overall rating. And this book is a second chance romance, and it really reminded me of All Your Perfects by Colleen Hoover, especially at the start. It was kind of giving that same vibe. But in this one, the FMC Yasmin, she had to deal with a lot of awful things all happening at once, and this led her to have a lot of mental health issues. And then she divorced her husband, Josiah, and then they, in this book, are kind of dealing with co-parenting, and they also have a business together, so it talks a lot about them navigating that as well. So I personally didn't like this book, and I just felt like Yasmin was around people that were not maybe really good for her. Even her friends would say some things to her at the start and making comments about her ex-husband, which I did not think were appropriate at all. Also, Josiah was just very self-centered in my opinion, and I felt like the connection between them, it was just purely physical, and outside of that they were just very poor communicators and weren't able to communicate their feelings on certain situations. And then most interactions, they were just constantly fighting with each other. So I personally didn't think they really worked well together as a couple, but then we're being told of just how well they are as a team and just how they belong together and stuff, but it wasn't really shown on page that that is true. Josiah also said some things to his daughter, I think it was, that I just thought were so wrong, and I just didn't agree with him at all. And I really just thought it was unfair to the daughter and the son, the things that he was saying. So yeah, I don't know if it's just me not being a super big fan of second chance romances, but I did give this one 2 stars, unfortunately. I do want to give Kennedy Ryan another chance though, so I might read another one of her books at some point, but I probably won't be running to do that like anytime soon. But after that, I read an amazing book, and that was The Women, which it was super interesting because I was not super excited to go into this because it's not the typical genres that I read. This is a historical fiction, and I got this book for my mom for Mother's Day, and she read it, loved it, gave it 5 stars, and told me to read it, and she thought I would really enjoy it, which I thought I would like it, but I did not think that it was going to be my next 5-star read. So this one's set in 1966, and the FMC. Her name is Frankie, and at the start she discovers that her brother, who she's best friends with, he is going to war, and she wants to follow him because she wants to help with the war efforts as well. So she becomes a nurse, and then she also goes to war, which she got really inspired after talking to one of her brother's friends about how women can also be heroes. So she wants to help out and she wants to be a hero too, which definitely came with some difficulties for her because her family, her mom and dad in particular, were very conservative and they didn't want her to go to the war. I had such a great time reading about her finding her passion and just making some amazing friends while she was working as a nurse during the Vietnam War. And there was also a side plot of romance too, which was interesting to say the least. There were also some really emotional and difficult to read moments between her and her family, and it was just such a gripping novel. And just reading about her journey, how she was able to pick up the pieces afterwards, and her trying to speak up and tell her story, meanwhile no one's listening or believes her in what she's saying. It was just an amazing book, and I highly recommend this one. There were also a few plot twists at the end that I didn't see coming, but I know I already said this at the start of me talking about this one, but I rated this one 5 stars, and definitely read this if you haven't yet. And the next book I read after that was Scarlet Princess, which is the first book of the Lachlan Feud series, which I hadn't heard too much about this series, but I wanted to give it a try. There were 4 books, but unfortunately I ended up DNFing the first one. I just was not interested at all in what was happening, and I felt like I was a little bit bored. So what happened was that the FMC Rowan, her and her cousin, get caught illegally smuggling some alcohol, and she is supposed to be put on trial to determine what her punishment should be. And then the MMC, his name is Theo, and he is like, I can't even really recall what happened here, but they end up spending a lot of time together, and I felt like they got together like super fast. But when I was about 65% of the way through, I realized that I didn't know what was really happening and I just didn't really care. And then their relationship I wasn't a huge fan of, and I wasn't really rooting for them. So then I decided I should probably just DNF this because I don't care about anything. And honestly, if I didn't write notes about it, I probably wouldn't have remembered anything, because I just felt like it wasn't a memorable story with memorable characters. So that was a bit of a disappointment after reading a 5-star book, which was like the complete opposite. But then the last book that I read was a novel love story, and I was so excited for this to come out. I also have a reading vlog on this if you're interested in watching that for more detail. But this was about the FMC. Her name is Eileen, but she goes by Elsie, and she is a huge fan of romance books, but of this particular romance series. And one day she's driving, going to this book club meeting, and she ends up falling into a town, which ends up being the town from the novel series that she's obsessed with. But I felt like it wasn't as magical as the 7-Year Slip, and I just didn't get the same magical feelings that I did when I was reading the 7-Year Slip. I haven't read The Dead Romantic, so I can't speak on that one, but I was a huge fan of The 7-Year Slip, and I rated that one 5 stars early on at the start of the year. But in this magical fake town, she meets the MMC, and his name is Anders. He is the bookshop owner of the bookshop in the little town, and he's also pretty well known in the town. But there is something about Anders that she is like kind of unsure about, because she realizes that everyone in the town is part of the characters from the series, but he isn't. So there's something kind of suspicious about him that she's trying to figure out. Well, I don't know if she's really like actively trying to figure it out, but she ends up figuring out later. She does know though that he doesn't want her in the town, and he's trying to actively get her to leave, but her car broke down and it's just like she's not able to leave. So with this book, I felt like the romance was basically non-existent. The characters had one particular interaction at the start of the book, which I was like so shocked that, first of all, I was even put in this, but I was even more shocked that afterwards we were supposed to root for these people after that happened. It was so weird to me that that happened at the start of the book. And then I just felt like the magical realism aspect, like it wasn't explained why or how she got into this magical fake town. And same thing with leaving. Like I thought it would be kind of a process for her to get into this place, but it was just kind of like she drove in and out thing, which I feel like is why the whole magical realism aspect was a little bit weaker compared to the 7-Year Slip. Overall, I felt like this was more so Elsie trying to rediscover herself after she went through some difficult times back in the real world. And yeah, the romance just wasn't strong and the plot was just not really existent either. It was kind of just like cozy, fun vibes, which I felt like was the only redeeming aspect of this, was just how cute and cozy the town was. And I did really like the townspeople as well, with her getting to know them and her exploring this cute little town. But yeah, otherwise it kind of fell flat for me. So I did end up giving this one 3 stars, but it's not like a bad 3 stars, and I still think I would recommend this one. But those are all of the books that I read. And then getting into my July TBR. Sorry, I'm just on my computer getting up the next list. But there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books that I want to read for July. And the first one is called With Love, Miss Americana. This is the same author that wrote Ties That Tether. And this book actually came out in June, so it was kind of a coincidence that I read Ties That Tether and then the next one, or I don't think they're connected, but then the author came out with another book the same month that I read one of her books for the first time. So this is a young adult romance, and this is about the FMC and her mother moving from Nigeria to America, and she is trying to figure out the whole American high school thing. So to prepare herself and to kind of research about it, she watches a bunch of American high school movies just so she kind of knows what to expect going into her senior year. And once she gets there, she meets the MMC, and it seems like he is kind of encouraging her to get into singing, and I think she's going to join a glee club type thing, which this will go against her mother's wishes and her expectations that she has for her daughter. So I feel like that's where the conflict is going to lie. But I'm eager to read that one. And then I also want to read Of Jade and Dragons. This is a young adult fantasy romance, and the FMC is an engineer and wants to follow in her dad's footsteps, which her father is then murdered, and she's trying to figure out why, how, and what happened to her father by going to this engineering guild, which there she meets the Prince of High Command. So I feel like that's where the romance is going to be. And in the blurb, it doesn't really explain why, but I guess she's kind of well known because maybe her father's well known. And then she's like thrown into this trial for an apprenticeship, and people are going to be coming after her. So that is kind of the plot of that one. Oh, and she also wants to avenge her father, of course, because of the murder. So next on my list is The Problem with Players, and this is a contemporary romance, and I think I saw someone on Instagram talk about this one. I can't remember where, but they were saying just how great the author and the writing and the storytelling is. So I'm really excited to read this one, which I'm not usually a huge sports romance fan, so we'll see whether or not I'm going to be able to get into this one. But the FMC is a baseball coach, and then it turns out that the assistant coach is her ex-boyfriend, and this ex used to be like in the big leagues but has, I guess, since retired, so he's going to be assistant coaching with her. So it's going to be a second chance romance, which I'm also interested to see if I'm going to enjoy, because based off of the second chance romance that I read in June, I wasn't a huge fan. But also in this book, I guess something happens where she ends up having to stay with her ex-boyfriend and then realizes that she might still have feelings for him. So we'll see how that one goes. The next book is a thriller, and it is What Lies Between Us. This book my sister recommended to me because she's pretty into thrillers, and she gave this one 5 stars. And the blurb is pretty vague, but what I got is that the main characters, one of them gets chained up in the attic, and then this house is like, something's wrong with the house. I don't know if it's haunted or what, but essentially what the blurb explained was that this one character has to atone for some really bad things that they did in the past. So it seems very kind of like mysterious because it's so vague, but I did already download this one on Kindle Unlimited, so I'm excited to start that one. Second last on my list, I have XOXO. This is a young adult romance, and in this one, the FMC has this dream of going to a conservatory music school, a prestigious music conservatory, and she meets the MMC and they spend a day together adventuring and whatnot. But then the next day he is like nowhere to be seen and is disappeared. Later though, the FMC and her mom go to South Korea to take care of her grandmother, which there she's also attending this artist school. And then of course she runs into the guy that she saw, but she discovers that he's actually famous and part of this really popular K-pop group. So the blurb says that she kind of has to choose between him or pursuing her own dreams, being a musician. So I'm interested to see how that one goes, and I also already have it downloaded on KU. And the last book on my list here is Heartless Hunter. This is a young adult fantasy romance, and so many people have been talking about this and raving about this online. The FMC in this one, she has to conceal the fact that she's a witch because witches are being hunted. So as she's trying to hide that she's a witch and not be discovered for who she really is, she ends up meeting the MMC and they get into a relationship together. Based on the blurb though, it seems that he is kind of suspicious of her and is not really sure whether or not he can trust her. I think he is like a witch hunter. I can't remember if it said on the blurb or if people have just said it talking about it online, but I've heard really great things about this, like I said, so I'm really eager to see how this one goes. But those are all the books that I wanted to talk about today for my June reading wrap up and July TBR. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you've read any of the books mentioned, please let me know your thoughts in a comment down below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more book content, and I will see you in a new video next week. Bye!